السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. مرحبا بكم اليوم في هذه الجلسة والتي ستكون بعنوان الانتقال إلى الطاقة النظيفة، الفرص، التحديات والطريق إلى المستقبل. سنحاول الإجابة عن ما هو التصور الإقليمي لمسارات الانتقال إلى مستقبل منخفض الكربون في سياقات السيناريوهات الرامية إلى تحقيق أهداف اتفاقية باريس. في هذه الجلسة سيتناول المتحاورون دور الغاز الطبيعي المسال كوقود انتقالي لإحلال الفحم، والإمكانات التي يحملها الهيدروجين كناقل للطاقة النظيفة، والمواقع الجغرافية الجديدة للإنتاج وتنوع استخداماته في مختلف القطاعات، فضلاً عن أهمية مصادر الطاقة المتجددة. يسرني أن أدعو الدكتورة ظبية المهندي من جامعة حمد بن خليفة لإدارة هذه الجلسة.
Assalamu alaikum. Our first speaker today comes to us from the International Energy Agency. Ms. Araceli Fernandez will give us a short presentation on the technology innovation at the IEA.
Right, good morning, everyone. A real pleasure to be joining this excellent second edition of the Earthna Summit. And of course, as always, a pleasure on behalf of the IEA to be participating in this important summit as we did in the first edition as well. I just wanted to thank again the organizers of the whole summit and Qatar Foundation here for the great work in pulling all these excellent sessions together with all these distinguished speakers, and a pleasure to be joining this excellent panel as well. So just wanted to give you a very brief introduction to some of the latest trends that we are seeing from the IEA in terms of clean energy technology deployment, development, and how this sits in the wider energy context. Just wanted to get started by having a look at this picture, which shows for some of the clean energy technologies where we stand today in terms of deployment and how this compares to some of the milestones that we would see towards 2030, particularly on a different set of energy transitions or pathways that we looked at at the IEA. First one being our stated policy scenario, which really looks at what are the policies in place at the time of writing, as well as what we call the APS, which is our announced pledges scenario. We take into account all the climate and sustainability pledges that governments put forward and simulate and understand what implications this could have for clean energy technology demand. And then a third scenario, which is what would be needed to reach net zero emissions by 2050 at the global level for the energy sector. So as you can see, the implementation gaps of these different technologies vary quite a lot when we look at this wide range. But it's important to highlight here as well that when we look back over the last 8 years or so, since 2015, we've seen a great progress in terms of clean energy technology deployments, particularly on the back of government policies, but also market opportunities that are really driving the growth for these technologies. If we look at back 2015 and we just look at the growth since then, we can see, for example, in the case of PV, we saw an 8-fold increase in terms of capacity additions, but that was a 27-fold increase when we look at electric cars and batteries. So again, tremendous growth here. And then, as you see, we've seen different progress, different rates of growth with low emissions hydrogen or CCUS, for example, seeing a doubling in terms of the deployment during that period. So again, different paces, but we've seen as well there is proof that things can move very fast when there are targeted and effective policies in place. How this sits in the wider context of energy. We just wanted to send a message, which is that we see this let's say, movement towards a new, context on the energy sector, particularly looking at how we are entering into a context where we expect to see, let's say, relatively ample supplies of different forms of energy right now or in the medium term. But this doesn't have to really complace us in terms of energy security risks. We see different energy security risks arising in that context, and so that would remain really an important, let's say, role of the IEA in terms of monitoring this. Let me explain you why we are really behind that message. First indicator I wanted to show here is the spare capacity for oil production from the larger producers. And here we see that since 2023, already this or spare capacity, say for production, for the large oil producers, has increased between 5 to 6 million barrels per day. So that's a sign that there's capacity that is available to react to shocks in the market. When we look at the case of gas, here we see that at the moment the market is relatively tight, but we expect a new wave of LNG production facilities coming through with their export facilities as well towards 2030, which could really increase this ability of the market to react to increasing demand and to shocks in the market as well. We expect that not all of that, let's say, growth towards 2030 in terms of exporting LNG capacity would find its way in the demand side in the very short term. There will be some rebalancing of the markets. And then we will expect some, let's say, reduction in the utilization rates of some of these LNG export facilities, which could again provide this spare room or flexibility for the supply to react. But this goes beyond oil and gas. When we look at, for example, the case of solar PV, what we see is that, as we saw in the previous slide, demand deployment has been growing quite fast. But manufacturing for these technologies has grown even faster, which means that there are most of these manufacturing facilities for solar PV modules and some of their upstream components that really are not fully utilized. And again, that can react in case of need to these kind of shocks in the market. Similarly, we would see the case or similar situation for the case of batteries as well to feed the electric mobility market and other applications as well when it comes to electricity grids. Now, this situation, as I've mentioned, doesn't need to, let's say, send the message that energy security is all fine. As we move into a new energy system, there could be some energy security risks that could be alleviated, but there could be others that could be emerging. And this is because two main reasons. The first one is that when we look at, from where this oil and LNG will be supplied, in most cases, we see that Middle East, of course, is a key region. And most of these exported commodities will go through the Strait of Hormuz, meaning that any disruption in that critical choke point could again put at risk some of these ample supplies that we would expect coming through. And a similar caveat we need to put when we look at, solar PV, electric vehicles, batteries, some of these modular, small, clean energy technologies. Most of them are produced in China. We'll speak more about this in a minute. And again, that would mean that if there is a particular, let's say, disruption, if there's a particular incident, be it because of weather events, be it because of industrial failure in a particular facility, again, that supply could be, let's say, disturbed. So we just wanted to highlight that, again, these ample supplies don't need to be taken for granted. And to highlight this, just wanted to mention that towards the end of this week, we'll be having at the IEA a major Future of Energy Security Summit that could be held in London with more than 60 countries, and it's organized in collaboration with the UK government to discuss these very same issues. Let me just go very quickly through the point about LNG, where we see indeed, as I've mentioned before, an expansion moving forward in terms of LNG export capacity, particularly coming from Qatar, investments in the US, where the export capacity is going to be doubling towards 2030. Now, we see that, of course, all this capacity that is being under construction will need to find its way into different demand segments. We've seen in the past how China has been a major demander of LNG, becoming the major LNG importer in 2023. Also, Europe has been importing quite significant amounts of LNG, particularly since Russian invasion of Ukraine. But when we look forward, it is not given for granted that this, let's say, amount of LNG will be much more growing, because we see a major input from renewable capacity that's very competitive, and we also see progress on energy efficiency applications. We expect that most of this demand growth for LNG is going to come from emerging markets that are growing very fast, like Southeast Asia and India. And it could be important to monitor those markets very closely because, of course, there could be uncertainty about how fast that demand can be absorbed. Looking very closely at prices, how LNG prices from export liquefaction facilities can really compete, for example, with availability of coal, can compete as well with these domestically manufactured renewable technologies in most cases as well. Now, so again, that price kind of sensitivity is going to be really crucial to unlock this additional available capacity in terms of exports. Now, the other quick element I wanted to bring forward is electrification. That's another major trend that we are seeing very, very clearly in this new energy system. We look back to 2010, as you see in the slide, we saw electricity demand growing as fast, or twice as fast, as total energy demand. The energy system is becoming more and more electrified, and that's going to continue. We really expect moving forward, and a more electrified system is a more efficient system, which means that total energy will grow at a lower pace. Now, this, let's say, electricity demand is going to come in most cases through major markets. We see China playing an important role here. When we look back at the last decade, it accounted for 2/3 of the global electricity demand being added to the system. Moving forward towards 2035, we expect those 2/3 to reduce to 40%. And this is because, again, emerging economies, emerging markets are coming very fast. And also we expect advanced economies to return to growth when it comes to electricity demand. And this growth of electricity demand is going to come from two major uses. One is, on one hand, conventional uses. So as we keep electrifying our economy, we keep demanding more appliances, for example. Cooling demand is increasing, but we also expect new uses coming very strongly with electric vehicles, with heat pumps electrifying other parts of heat, as well as, for example, the increasing use for data centers and artificial intelligence. Now, I just want to go very quickly because we're running out of time in terms of the point I wanted to make about clean energy technologies coming very quickly and very fast. And this is to show that these manufacturing industries for clean energy technologies are not anymore a niche market, nor even a climate opportunity. They are really vast industries that have really very clear market or industrial opportunities. Back in 2015, around 10 years ago, this market globally was around $200 billion. And this was a situation where only 1% of cars globally were electric. And at the same time, we're adding only 10% of the solar PV capacity additions that we are expecting to be added by the end of last year. Just 10 years later, when we look at around 2023, we see that market size to have expanded towards $700 billion. And we expect this trend to continue. Towards 2035, we expect that market to become a $2 trillion market, which is the equivalent of the global oil market today. And you see the important or the big share of China in terms of that market. And just simply because in China, 40% of cars sold are electric already today, and they are adding 60% more renewable capacity additions than the rest of the world. So it's just moving very fast. But as you see, as we move forward into the future, that share starts to reduce a bit as other countries start to reap into the benefits of this new clean energy economy. Just very quickly, I wanted to emphasize the point about risks on this clean energy technology supply chains, because as you see here in this slide, we're showing what's the value of the output from these manufacturing facilities, with 60% on average being accumulated in China. It really depends on what technology and what step of the supply chain we are talking about. This is coming from a work that we did, we published last year at the IRENA, Energy Technology Perspectives 2024, which is all fully available. And one key point to emphasize here is that this means that when we look at port by port, all these specific shipping routes, we see two major trends. One is that there is a major trade flow from China and Southeast Asia towards Europe. And the other one is that more than 50% of that value that is traded from clean energy technologies passes through the Strait of Malacca. And just to put that into context, the equivalent of our supply or fossil fuel supply, more specifically, would be that 20% of the international traded fossil fuels will pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So 50% versus 20%. So again, different considerations, of course, when it comes to those commodities, but it's an important point of context. And just quickly wanted to say that beyond monitoring the deployment in the market of different energy technologies, we also look at the development, how different technology options are getting developed, how quickly they are potentially coming to the market. And we just published earlier this month work on the state of innovation that could be, again, quite interesting for the audience, all available on our website. And just to mention that as a novelty, we are looking here at 18 milestones that we are calling international races. Those are specific races that different companies, different consortia are pushing to develop different technology areas that could fulfill policy objectives, particularly when it comes to, for example, long-term energy security, environmental protection, but also core science that could really help do these spillovers through other technology areas. A couple of examples here where you see that those international races will go through different phases in terms of scale up, raising funds, and really bringing the projects to the market. And then just wanted to quickly conclude, and sorry for taking a bit longer, as I've mentioned at the beginning, so we really enter into a new phase of energy systems. I think this is very clear to everyone. It's important here to acknowledge that this clean energy transition is alleviating some energy security risks, but bringing others as well. So it was very important for governments to manage those risks. And to do that, particularly monitoring geographical concentration would be important, but it's also very important not to keep our eyes off competitiveness, how to boost competitiveness and innovation hand in hand, and of course how they can leverage as well, improving our resilience and our sustainability when we produce and put these technologies back to the markets. Industrial strategies would be key here, and that starts by acknowledging what are the domestic opportunities and the domestic weaknesses at the same time, having a targeted strategy that can really point towards strategic partnerships with other countries, and this is where, of course, international collaboration and gatherings like these ones come in, and of course, time is of the essence given how quickly things are evolving around the world. So I will keep it here, look forward to the panel discussion, and apologies for taking a bit more time.
Araceli, it was a very interesting presentation. With us today is a very distinguished panel with multiple perspectives. First, we have Ms. Gauri Singh, the Deputy Director of International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. And we have Dr. Marcello Costantable, the Chief Economist at Qatar Energy and Environment from Kiri at HBKU. And Dr. Stephen Wright, Associate Professor for International Relations and Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at Hamad bin Khalifa University, and our speaker, Mrs. Araceli, she can join us again on the stage. I don't know if this is, okay. Very interesting takes that we were just listening to. We know that in 2016, the Paris Agreement established a global commitment to limit greenhouse gases. There was some technological commitment over there, but it had a lot of emphasis as well on trying to bring together local, regional, and global entities together. And from an IRENA perspective, which is international framework, they are very imperative to catalyzing global action. Yet we can see that there is a growing fragmentation, even though there is a lot of innovation that has been happening. How can multilateral agencies, such as IRENA, address this challenge?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to share perspectives from IRENA. You know, what you're saying is absolutely correct, because, you know, when you have large global disturbances, then naturally it does impact. Okay, is that better?
It's technical issues.
Is this better? Okay. So I was just saying that when you have to undergo energy transition globally, is it okay? Okay, let's try this now. So, you know, no one said that energy transition, a global energy transition is going to be simple, it's going to be smooth, it's going to be without any glitches. No one said that. And we also know that when you're talking about energy transition, you're not just talking about, just the power sector transforming itself. You're actually talking about economic transition that would happen. And when you're talking about that scope of things, then I think it's important to keep in mind that these kind of upheavals will happen. So at IRENA, I think one of the things that we really think a lot about is where are renewables today? So we did see in the beginning of the, is it okay? Maybe I can speak without, yeah, maybe I can do that. Okay, I think it's a small, capital that's following the deployment of renewables. And what is also clear is that renewables have probably crossed that hump and will continue to grow at its own momentum. The cost of renewables are at a low, geographically you can look at any geography and you find that that's pretty much the most affordable form of new energy. And which is why you find that out of the additional capacity that's getting built every year, you find that renewables occupies more than 90% of that. So these are some indicators to show that there has been a huge momentum that is now being market-led. I'm happy to just speak like this. So the way the renewables sector is going, it's very much market-led, and I think that's the strength of the sector. The second thing I want to point out here is that when you are also looking at how countries view their own energy policies, and we heard it in the presentation, energy security and energy independence are figuring very much on the top of the agenda, which wasn't the case maybe a couple of years back. But now the countries are very focused on looking at strategies for their own, meeting their own growing energy needs, especially in the developing countries, focusing on where the energy will come from and what kind of energy independence or energy security they can have. And thirdly, I just want to point out that another thing that we're seeing is that renewables is actually giving way to a new wave of green industrialization. And again, this was mentioned in the presentation where countries are looking at pushing for green industrialization as the industrialization policy 2.0. So it's really talking about the next stage of where renewables can go. And I think these factors combined, we hope that this sector will be resilient enough to move with the flow and and kind of we probably just need to wait out and see where this sector will grow. But my own expectation is that the momentum is so strong that it will carry forward because of the kind of cost at which power is getting delivered through renewables. So let me.
Okay. So how do regional alliances like the GCC in the Gulf play a role in the international frameworks? Can they help in achieving the connections, or do they have to follow a similar strategy?
So I think the Gulf region, the Middle East is a very important energy player, and without a doubt, this has been the case for the last many decades. Now the question really is, how is this geography really making it shift into also investing in the new energy systems that are coming up? And when I talk about, this, this region, it has the potential to actually be the innovators, especially in technologies that we know in the energy transition will be very important, and those are like the CCUS, for example. And because we know that moving towards a net zero is not about just cutting emissions, but it's also about removal of carbon dioxide. And for that, I think this region has, has at least the financial heft, the inclination to look at becoming innovative research and development led place where it can actually get a strong collaboration of getting to become a hub of industrial scale pilots, if you want to call it, of how CCUS can play a part in the energy transition. The other thing where I think definitely the region has definite advantages in the field of energy efficiency. Not much has been done on it, but I think that's a huge scope that's there. And when I talk technology, I don't want to just limit it to technology, because by technology alone you probably won't succeed. But if you look at innovation more like a systemic innovation where you bring in market design and regulations, you're looking at business models, you're also looking at technology and building the infrastructure around it, and building also the human capacity to be able to manage the system integration and operation. That's when a region can really shape up and show to become the hub of a systemic innovation center.
Thank you so much, Gauri. And there's a lot in the GCC. There's a lot of talk about blue hydrogen, blue ammonia. Here in Qatar, they've been talking about carbon capture and storage.
develop hydrogen. To absorb the cost initially will be high. So it is well placed. Yeah, there are barriers also, but yeah, as always.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being loud. Inshallah, we got over the technical issues. Dr. Stephen, there is a lot of new players that are coming in the area of energy. The US is ramping up LNG production and exports. They're lifting up any barriers that they had from the last administration. Central Asia is looking for reducing their footprint as well. And then there is new gas exploration in the Mediterranean. How are these shifts will change our understanding of the global energy transition?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the question. The microphone's not working. I can see, or is it? Oh, it is. We're back to normal. Okay, so thank you very much for the question. I think when you look at the emerging areas of increased production, in particular for LNG and other forms of energy, in my opinion, actually, it shows you that conventional energy still matters, and actually demand for that actually will continue. What you can see is, even if you were to be looking at the energy transition that took place, from from coal to oil, you can see even that if you compare, say, the demand for coal from the 1960s compared to what it is now, it's considerably higher. So I think the framing of the way we can actually look at the changing growth in new energy sources is that it's an energy addition, more so than an energy transition. Because what you're seeing is, yes, there is increased demand when it comes to renewable sources, but the conventional sources are also seeing increased demand as well. So when we see the increased demand in the geopolitics of the Eastern Mediterranean, I think it's fascinating because it shows you that the demand for that increased gas, the most likely market is going to be the European Union. And you can see that as a result of the unexpected invasion of Ukraine and how it's affected the flow of gas to the European Union, the main beneficiary of this in terms of energy supplies has been the United States, because I think it's 43% or round about that of the EU's demand has come from US LNG. And so that's basically helped the situation there. So the increased productivity that's taking place in the EU will actually feed into that. But likewise, also, the way in which energy demand, energy consumption is taking place and the energy transition is not linear. It varies considerably across the world. In the global south, you see that the concerns are much more about economic development and how to have a cost-effective solution. Whilst if you're seeing in other regions, yes, the priority is about renewable fuels, but it's multifaceted, it varies considerably across the world, and the complexity of the energy transition should not be seen in a linear fashion, in my opinion. But largely speaking, what you're seeing is the demand overall is increasing for energy in all forms. Yes, you're seeing a growth in renewables, but you're also seeing it in conventional.
So with the traditional and the emerging energy powers, how do the role of energy security while looking into the climate action, and how would you balance between these two?
Yeah, okay. So I think with regard to the emergence of new powers in terms of energy productivity and also consumption areas, you're seeing a huge variance. I mean, if I just start with the United States, the shale revolution has been completely transformational. If you were to have asked me, say, 15 years ago, the United States would have been seen to be one of the main consuming countries when it came to gas. But what it has come now is it's a leading exporter of gas globally, in addition to oil. And I think on that basis, you can see how the US now has formed a unique relationship with the EU in terms of energy supply, displacing Russia. Likewise, since 2014, you started seeing Russia move increasingly focused on China in terms of how supplies were taking place there. And that's, was before previously you could see the relationship between China and Russia as being grounded in Marxist Leninism. Now it's really about oil and gas. That's the heart of the relationship between those two geopolitical areas. Even if you're looking at, for example, the Gulf states, here, what we're seeing is that, yes, you're seeing very impressive moves towards renewables being adopted in cleaner fuels, but nevertheless, the projection is still to be an exporter of oil and gas and LNG for the foreseeable future, to commercialize those resources. Because again, conventional fuels still matter as part of the discussion. Also, when you look at, say, other countries such as India, you're seeing moves definitely in terms of renewables, but you're also seeing conventional demand also increase as well. So the picture is quite complex, it's varied, and it varies by country and even within regions across the world, especially between the global north and global south, where you're seeing the focus being very much on economic development.
So it has been mentioned a lot, the technological aspect, especially in Araceli's presentation about China being a leader in batteries, in electrification. Ms. Gauri mentioned that as well, most likely also in the hydrogen. So how's, now there's like an escalating trade war between the US and China. How will that affect the energy transition?
Yeah, I mean, the story in terms of looking at the geopolitical competition between the United States and China is really the central defining feature of contemporary geopolitics and is likely to be for the future. In my opinion, the way in which we're seeing now with under the Trump administration implementing tariffs, escalating tensions on a global basis, this is a very negative indicator in terms of how the energy transition will be taking place. It affects supply chains. It affects a commercialized trade in terms of what are the best technologies when it comes to renewables to help the energy transition. Also, what we can see is that the motivations are quite different. You can see the United States as being, I think what was the phrase President Trump used? Drill, baby, drill. It's very much about trying to be to have a dominance in terms of the conventional resources. But China, on the other hand, what you can see is its focus when it comes to the move towards renewables is incredibly impressive. But the motivation is not just about dominating that field. For China, it's also about achieving more energy security because it imports, I think, about a good 75% of its oil. So it's about moving away and achieving its own security. So there are variances, yeah.
Thank you so much. Araceli, we end with you. We started with you. So you showed us a lot of key technologies and that renewable energy is actually competitive in some regions. And we heard today that there is really importance to understand the geographical context. But with the change in geopolitics, with some trends, what do you think would be the biggest barriers of stopping the adaptation of like hydrogen, CCUS, or energy efficiency? Is it like an investment hurdle, or what do you think?
Thanks a lot. Give me that try first. Yeah, maybe I think there's been excellent comments, and I'll just maybe do a bit of a compliment. Something we've discussed, I think, a bit less. I think you've mentioned a wide range of technologies in that question, and I think we've tend to focus a bit more on, the area of renewables, which, as has been said, indeed, this is really at the moment where deployment is market-led, and really competition is clearly in favor of those. But there are other areas. I think hydrogen has been mentioned, CCUS has been mentioned, and as I've put in the slide at the very beginning, there are other clean energy technology areas that for a suite of reasons, they haven't really been progressing as fast. In terms of, if we understand progress as, reaching markets at a sizable level, and really getting into this, break-even point where at least in some configurations or in some regions, in some regional context, they would start to be competitive without the requirement of, a continuous subsidization or, support process through governments. And I think there could be some reasons. Some reasons may be inherent to the technologies. I think when we look at, these kind of success stories, solar PV modules, batteries, even electric cars in some regions, to be honest. I mean, China, in 2023, 60% of the car sold in China that were electric were cheaper without subsidies than the conventional one. So we are really starting to see some spillovers. But if we look at these technologies, most of them are relatively small. They are modular. They can be mass-produced. So not all clean energy technologies have that advantage. Some are large, they need to be tailored to specific reconfiguration or regional context, some CCUS applications, for example. There could be some components that could be modular. If we think about direct air capture, for example, in some designs. If we think about low emissions hydrogen, electrolytic route, of course, leads to electrolyzer production, which again, we could think about modularity there. But not all the elements around those big families of technologies are modular and small. And so I think that's a kind of a disadvantage to some extent when it comes to the pace at which learnings can be shared because of this, let's say, a barrier towards mass production. And the other thing, I think it's related to, indeed, having a stable, when you mention about barriers, so having a stable vision, stable political and policy context in major markets that can really give this certainty for investors to go and de-risk those investments. If you don't have some of these advantages in terms of the technology characteristics, those are even more important. You need to de-risk those investments. And to this, you need to have the stability to create the demand for those large hydrogen projects, for example, as they are happening now here in Qatar as well, to make sure that this kind of initial state of first-of-a-kind projects can really make it through. And the learnings then can be shared within that region, with other regions, and start to scale up. So I would say in terms of barriers, there's some inherent characteristics in technologies, but also stability, certainty for investors, and creating demand. I think that's key.
Any recommendation for policymakers from the IEA?
Sorry, I couldn't.
Any recommendations for policymakers?
Right. I think in the current context, as has been said as well, I think international collaboration becomes even more important. I think we entered quite a few years ago into a globalized system, and I think the supply chains for new energy technologies that are emerging or are really already there are following a similar path. There's some clear players, but there's no one supply chain that is fully, let's say, happening, completely happening in just one country. So I think we need to leverage on that. I would put back to this kind of last slide that I've mentioned. Energy security is not to go away. We just need to understand the new phase of energy security with the complexities, as has been mentioned. Former energy security risks could remain to some extent, and new energy security risks could come. So we need to adapt policies and international collaboration mechanisms to manage, to be able to address both. And for this, international collaboration is going to be key, because not all countries can, let's say, be competitive in all steps of a supply chain or in all supply chains. So we need to understand as a country or a region what are our opportunities, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, and find the strategic partners that will help us be competitive and innovate. And for that, it doesn't mean you need to be autonomous. It just you need to partner with the right stakeholders. So I think as a key recommendation, put international collaboration to the fore.
Thank you so much, Araceli. So it seems like we heard a lot today from our panelists on the importance of international collaboration, that not to ignore energy security in the energy transition. And even though we have a lot of affordable, energy efficient solutions that are coming up from renewable base, it is a complex chain that it is affected by geopolitics and other limited supply of key materials and other things that make it really uncertain, but at the same time, it's not very sad because we can figure out a lot of the barriers. Thank you so much for our panelists, and I apologize for the technical issues that happened in the beginning. So if you can join me in thanking them, thank you so much. This is on, yeah? All right. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Omran Al-Kuwari, the CEO of Qatar Foundation International and the author of the new book, The Future of Liquefied Natural Gas in a Decarbonizing World.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay. Alhamdulillah works.
First of all, congratulations on the new book. It is very interesting and timely. We heard a lot from our panelists who were talking about the importance of the transition. And the figure in the beginning we heard from the IEA that LNG is up. So from the IEA presentation, and we saw also some touches from Dr. Marcello on the role of hydrogen. What do you think how the transition will play across the different regions, like in terms of like Qatar, the GCC, UK, and Japan? And you already have touched upon that in your book.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very good question. I think it's basically a question that we've been trying to answer in different ways in the panel today. And when I started looking at this issue, it's obviously a very complicated issue, and trying to create a framework or a way to think about it. So to try to make it simple, try to look at it more from exporting countries and importing countries, and then look at dynamics from each of those and break down the industry throughout that, because obviously you have a large amount of stakeholders in between. But if you look at it from importing countries, I took three cases, three countries that are different in political systems, different in stages of development, and also different in their terms of their role in net zero and climate change. So it's China, Japan, and the UK. And if you start looking at each of those countries, where they are in their developing energy system journey, and where gas plays in that, you start to understand the different dynamics. We'll get to in a bit. But also looking at exporting countries, we look at it also from the resource holders, but also the international oil companies. And those two stakeholders have very different approaches. The resource holders, like Qatar, national oil companies, they think about it from very, very long-term perspectives, whereas international oil companies are impacted by their share price, by their shareholders, if they have to diversify from net zero, if not, if they're in Europe, they're in the US. And we've seen this in the last 5 years. For example, BP was beyond petroleum. Now they went fully, basically they plan to go fully net zero. And then last week they went back again to fossil fuels. Shell did a similar journey. So you can see that the IOCs are much more sensitive to discourse, to pressure from NGOs and academics, whereas NOCs can think about things from a different perspective. But those two play in the same market, which is then impacted by the kind of energy users. So I'm just giving an example of how complex the issue is and how it's hard to give a snapshot, general snapshot. That's why you have to look at it regionally, and you have to look at it from short term, medium term, long term, and then start looking at what are the variables that affect those different things. So obviously you have technology, you have what technology exists today that you can help decarbonize, what will exist in the future. You also have economics. What are countries prepared to pay for the energy, and what are they prepared to kind of leave on the table for their journey to net zero when we look at it. And then you have the social and political pressures or dynamics of each country, of each society. So all that are factors I look at for each country, for each part of the industry, and then try to come up with broad themes and conclusions for the next 10, 20, 30 years.
So your book touches upon systems analysis and decision-making tools, and you mentioned briefly your approach. You called it the TETI framework.
That's right, yes.
Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so when I started to understand, when I came during my research at UCL, when I started to think about how to approach this, and wanted to then figure out what's the best methodology. And there are broadly 3 different types of methodologies to look at energy transitions, and each one has their pros and cons. So the typical one is the techno-economic models. You look at the cost benefit of changing your systems, either going forward or looking at it back, reverse engineering, saying if we have to get to this X amount of renewables by this year, or et cetera. And which is good. It gives you numbers. It makes you feel like you have something you could hold. But if you look at it, model is only as good as whatever you put into it. So that's fine, but doesn't really cover everything. And then you have socio-economic theories that are good because they look at how society is moving. They look at how different stakeholders interact with each other. How the world is consuming going forward, and how they view the climate change and so on. That's important. But that's really leaves a lot on the table in terms of understanding the pros and cons of the economics of things for policymakers. And then the last one is institutionalism, which is important because it shows you how vested interests operate, how political systems operate, and how you make decisions around that. So when I decided which one works, I realized I had tried to create a combination of all 3. Which then you embed in each country, which gives you analysis of what works when you put a certain type of energy on top of it, in this case LNG. And then the idea is hopefully you find some interesting insights which you can apply. So for example, in the UK, yes, they have very aggressive net zero targets. They were one of the leaders. But then you have a cost of living crisis. You have Brexit. Are people really willing to increase their electricity costs in the short term? Probably not. In Japan, yes, they have a need to diversify. They import all the energy, but at the same time, they have really strong vested interests of these large companies that have a stake in nuclear or a stake in importing LNG and oil. And how does that work? So there's limitations in how fast they can move. Whereas in China, it's they're growing dramatically. It's all of the above approach, but at the same time, they also have to worry about social harmony and pollution, and making sure that people are living in a healthy environment, and that's going to drive a lot of their policies, as well as geopolitics and things like tariffs and so on. So these are the conclusions from the demand, and then from the industry standpoint, you look at it from how much pressure is going to be on the industry to kind of respond to net zero, but also how proactive do exporters want to be. And that will also be impacted by who the stakeholder is, if it's, again, national oil company, or if it's the IOC, or if it's a shipbuilder, or if it's a trader. Each have different approaches. But then when you look at those 2 aspects and try to combine the 2, that's what the framework tries to address.
So bringing it back to LNG. So LNG is considered like the bridging fuel in any scenario. And in Qatar, we're very proud to label it as the transition fuel that would be needed till like 2040 and even beyond. How do we ensure cleaner production technologies for LNG and to build the maximum capacity to have the maximum potential while avoiding the polluter image?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it's happening already. It's not really, on some levels, it's not that complex. It's not, in terms of the upstream and the liquefaction and the carbon capture and the methane reduction, all that's happening. Qatar Energy, for example, is doing all that, electrification facilities. But the majority of the emissions is still in the receiving side. So the carbon capture and figuring out that side is going to be a big part. But I think the idea that we're now talking about LNG or gas as transition fuel is interesting because even 3 years ago, that wasn't necessarily the case. The narrative has swung back the other way to kind of accept natural gas as a transition fuel. To give you an example, when I started my research 5 years ago, there was maybe 30 researchers. I think there was 2 doing algae, like 4 doing renewables, and then there was 1 person doing gas out of 30. Now I think there's 4 or 5. So back then it was seen there's no point doing gas, it's the past. Even my research in the beginning was about the geopolitics of renewable energy. But when I went into the community, I saw there's a big gap. And then the Russia situation happened before even this one, the previous one, and then US became a major exporter. So everything started to change, and gas is now considered part of the solution, subject to reducing emissions and seeing how it's compatible with new technologies such as SMR and et cetera. But this is still a huge opportunity as long as the industry continues to be proactive and innovative, not just in technology, but also in business models, like how to displace coal, how to sit alongside renewables in countries that are developing, in Asia and Africa especially. And I think if that continues and the investors in these IOCs have then moved to accept that, I think there's a pretty good future for gas in the context of climate change and net zero.
Do you think there will be any reduction in demand for LNG with the reignited interest in nuclear?
I mean, nuclear is definitely part of the solution. There's no doubt about it. Even Qatar has invested recently in SMR and Rolls-Royce project I was involved in. But it takes a long time to build these nuclear plants. And a lot of these SMRs are not proven yet. But even if they are, the world is changing. The demand's again increasing dramatically with AI, need for AI. I know it's not going to be exponential as everyone says, but it's still going to be a need. And there's definitely no real interest to see coal grow, although there's still some hints of that still happening. So really the answer is going to be or there's an opportunity for gas, there's no doubt about it. And LNG is the fastest growing segment within gas because I think pipeline, sadly, it was seen as a way to create geopolitical stability, but actually in this world now, nobody's interested in building pipelines. And you don't need to anymore with floating regas units and so on. So if you think about it from that perspective, it's hard to see LNG demand decreasing in the next 20, 30 years. After that, we'll see.
Thank you so much. Any final thoughts or messages from your book that you want to convey to our audience?
No, just as a Qatari, very proud and happy to see all these experts here sharing their ideas, and look forward to interacting with everyone. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. That concludes our session. We're a little bit above schedule, so I think you can catch the rest in this room, right? Yeah, okay, thank you so much.